The rise of extremism in post-war Europe, it wasn't some sudden explosion out of nowhere. Think of it more like a slow-burning fire, one that was fed by some very specific and very powerful fuels. So in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct exactly how it all happened, piece by piece.
It really is the central question, isn't it? How does a democracy, a system that's supposed to be built on freedom and choice, just fail? How does it give way to something else entirely? Well, the thing is, it's almost never just one single event. It's more like a perfect storm.
Right. It's a combination of these powerful, interconnected pressures. The crazy thing is, they all feed on each other, creating this environment where really radical ideas start to sound, well, pretty rational to a lot of people. So let's start with the very first major pressure point, this deep, lingering legacy of humiliation.
Okay, so everything really kicks off in the ashes of World War I. The fighting might have stopped, but the bitterness, that was just getting started. And it set the stage for a whole new kind of struggle.
And this slide really shows you the huge gap between what was demanded and what people were feeling. On one side, you have the Allies demanding unconditional acceptance of the peace treaties, no arguments. But on the other side, in a place like Germany, you have this widespread feeling of being totally wronged, of being betrayed. And we're not just talking about a political disagreement here. This was a deep, painful national wound.
And the terms of the treaty were just brutal. I mean, think about it. Entire chunks of territory were stripped away. Your military was basically dissolved. You were forced to take all the blame for the war. Your status on the world stage, gone. Every single one of these points just fueled this simmering resentment, and it was all aimed right at the democratic leaders who signed on the dotted line.
So, all that national resentment, it's like a pile of dry tinder. Potent, for sure, but it still needs a spark to really ignite. And that spark was economic collapse. Because, let's be real, when people can't feed their families, their patience for the political process runs out fast.
I mean, just look at this to get a sense of the sheer desperation. A single loaf of bread costing 200 times billion marks. That's not a typo. This was hyperinflation in Germany. Prices spiraled so completely out of control that people's entire life savings were wiped out, practically overnight. Just try to imagine everything you have ever worked for becoming completely worthless. And hey, if the hyperinflation didn't get you, unemployment was waiting in the wings. This chart just shows how dramatically things spiked. We're talking millions of people jobless, desperate, and, you guessed it, incredibly angry. They were the perfect audience for any extremist movement that came along promising to fix everything right now.
Okay, so we've got humiliation and economic despair simmering in the pot. Now let's add a third, really powerful ingredient to the mix, fear. And we're talking about a very specific fear here, the specter of a communist revolution sweeping across Europe.
And this quote is absolutely crucial to understanding what happened next. For a lot of people, supporting these extremist movements, it wasn't really about ideology. It was a calculated choice. They believed these authoritarian leaders were the only ones who could restore order and stop a communist revolution. It was a defense against what they feared even more, total social chaos and losing absolutely everything.
And that's exactly how authoritarianism was sold to the public. It wasn't framed as an attack on personal freedom. Oh no, it was positioned as the only defense against chaos, the only tool strong enough to get things back under control. It was a bitter pill to swallow, for sure. But the argument was that it was absolutely necessary to avoid the much greater disease of revolution.
So you've got this potent cocktail of anger, desperation, and fear. But how do you actually harness all that raw emotion? How do you shape it into a real political movement? Well, the answer was propaganda, and on a scale that nobody had ever seen before.
And they had a playbook that was just ruthlessly effective. Step 1. Identify a scapegoat. Find an enemy you can blame for everyone's problems. It could be democratic leaders, minority groups, foreign powers, anyone. Step 2. Craft a really simple message. Boil down all these complex issues into one simple, emotionally charged slogan. Step 3. Repeat it. Everywhere. Relentlessly. And finally, Step 4. Mobilize the masses. Use all that momentum to get people out into the streets.
And on top of that, they had all these new tools of influence. It went way beyond just simple slogans, posters, and big rallies. The real game changer was technology like the radio. Suddenly, extremist leaders could bypass the traditional media and speak directly to millions of people right in their own homes. That created this incredibly powerful sense of intimacy and urgency.
Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. You got all these external pressures, humiliation, economic crisis, fear, propaganda, just hammering away at democracy. But the thing is, they were hammering on a system that was already cracking from the inside. You have to remember, a lot of these post-war democracies were brand new. They were fragile. You had governments rising and falling constantly. Political violence was pretty common. And to try and deal with all these crises, they often had to use emergency powers, which ironically made them look even less democratic. It's no surprise that public trust was just eroding, and fast. All right, so let's put all these pieces together. How did all these different factors combine to create such a catastrophe?
This table really lays it all out, doesn't it? You've got the humiliation from the peace treaties, which just completely undermine the democratic leaders. Then the economic crisis, with hyperinflation and unemployment, created total desperation. That desperation, combined with the fear of communism, made authoritarianism seem like a necessary evil. Propaganda then took all of that and weaponized it. And the whole time, the democratic institutions themselves were so weak and unstable that they lost the trust of the very citizens who were supposed to defend them.
And this is the most important takeaway. These were not isolated issues. Not at all. It was a chain reaction. You see, the economic crisis made that feeling of national humiliation feel even worse. The fear of chaos made the propaganda 10 times more effective. It was this vicious cycle where each problem fed on the others, making the whole situation more and more explosive. And all of this leaves us with one final, and I think really vital question. Because understanding this anatomy of a crisis, it isn't just a history lesson. It's about learning to recognize the warning signs today. So what lessons does all of this hold for the resilience of our own democracies? That's something worth thinking about.